Alrighty, I've got a meta update for you from the first major Star Wars Unlimited Sector tournament that happened in Milan. It had over 500 people at it. Also going to talk a bit about the BIATL event that happened in Atlanta, Georgia, that we'll talk about in the later half of the video. But this is a major event, the first sector. I'm going to deep dive into what happened. A lot of you may already know what happened, and then we'll kind of go from there and see what we have to do. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. Helps out the channel a lot. And if you're looking for some more content from me, do check out my Patreon. I've got a lot going on there. All right, table of contents. So we're going to talk a bit about the sectional. I am also going to hop over to SW Competitive Hub so we can see the breakdown. Maybe we'll take a look at a couple deck lists. Probably not too many this time. You'll see in a moment why. There is going to be, for the first time I'm on my channel, a suspension talk. I mean, I've talked about that post-suspension of Boba, but I don't usually get into chats like that on this channel, but we're going to. Then we'll hop over to the BIATL tournament. I competed at that, was at the team event with two of my teammates from KTOD, and we did win it. And I'll talk about that team event, and then I'll also talk about the 6K main event that happened after the team event, and we'll do a little wrap up. So let's see at first, Milan Sectional. This is the Jango Tarkentown play rate. It started at 145 people out of approximately 550. I don't think that was the exact number. It's about 27% of the initial field. It was 45% of day 2 with 21 converting. That is a major overperformance for a deck that was already a quarter of the field. And notably, everyone kind of already knew it was the deck. Yet, even everyone that brought decks to counter it didn't seem to be that successful. It then ended up as 12 of the top 16 at 75% and 7 of the top 8. That last person in the top 8 was a BIATL deck. He did beat the first Jango he played and then lost. And then, yeah, Jango. So, Jango. Let's go take a look at some more details from this event now. All right, so over here, I'm over at SWU Competitive Hub. Great site for checking on tournament results. I do recommend you going back here. Right here, Sector Qualifier Milan, that second line, that's what we're going to look at. If you're interested in some of the decks from the BIATL Atlanta event, there were two pools, a 116-person pool and a 122-person pool. They're listed right here in the 4th and 5th row. I'm going to allude to some of the deck lists later, but I'm not actually going to pop these up at the later half of the video. So if you want to see some of these lists, do check them out here. But let's go take a look at the sector qualifier. This is a 546-person tournament. Here is our top 8. Jango, BIATL, Jango. Lots of Jango, right? If we scroll down here, there's a nice little pie chart. We can actually see, I'm not going to deep dive on this too much, and it's very small. I do recommend you just check it out. But Jango had a winning rate against almost every deck listed here. There were actually, he had a 48.5% win rate against Anakin and a 45.5% win rate against Gar. Those two decks were not particularly represented at this event, but maybe something to keep in mind. But basically, it was beating everything else, smashing some things, and then just like over 50%, even against decks that were trying to target it. So yeah, that's a lot. And there's a cool little graphic here. I actually see, this is actually from Mog TCG. So it's a little pie chart, right? We see, I said it was approximately 27. It was 26.36% of decks. Quinlan was the second most represented deck at 12%. And then, you know, Piet at 7.5, Han at 7.5. The new Boba was at 7, Sabine at 5, Cad Bane at 5, Palp at 4, and then like others made up 24%. Cunning Aspect was 54% of decks. No surprise there for me. But yeah, and then, you know, lots of little one-ofs and stuff like that. But let's take a look at, we're going to take a look at the winning list, of course. Let's see what we got here. So this is the Jango list. This was a weenie version of Jango. There's a lot of one drops here. There's Greedos, First Order Stormtrooper, Death Star Stormtrooper, ISB Agent. Very low to the ground version. Of course, it still has the big stuff. 3 Raiders, 3 Devastators, 3 War Juggernauts. So it looks like it's trying to use the weenies to push as much damage in the first few turns, and then even when they all get value traded off the board, you've pushed enough damage, and then it doesn't really matter so much because you're just going to chain these massive things and just finish your opponent off. So it's trying to just get to an early damage advantage, so just so its haymakers can kind of finish the game off. Look at the finalist. The second place deck here was also weenies. First Order, Greedo, ISB Agent. It didn't go as deep on them. Well, actually, it might have. There was also Guavian Antagonizer. So this unit doesn't die to pings the way like the Death Star Stormtrooper does. So it gives you a little more resiliency. But you're still seeing the same old top end in these decks. Of course, you're seeing triple Dark Raid. Armed to the Teeth is in this, which works pretty well when you have a lot of dinky units flying around. But yeah, we'll look at briefly at the third one. This also had weenies, so it looks like the weenie version did do a bit better. There was a one-of Sanctioner Shuttle, which is interesting. If you're going to play 2 cards on turn 1, you might be able to capture your opponent's turn 2 play. But the rest, pretty consistent. And I do want to look at this Piet deck. This is a triple Dark Raid deck, which we'll get into that card a little later. But that card is obscene. And yeah, so you see like a toolbox triple Dark Raid targets, Invincible, Finalizer, Chimera. You've got Assault Cruiser, you got Invisible Hand. Because you have Invisible Hand, I see a lot of cheap droids like the Separatist Commando and the B1 security team. So when that card comes in off a triple Dark Raid, it brings one of them out, and it attacks, it can bring one of them out. So try to make a board that way. It's a really good hit off of triple Dark Raid. And then Piet lets you just play those cards a bit cheaper even without the triple Dark Raid, or like so. And when he's out, even like super cheap, right? Because he makes them even 2 less. So this is an interesting deck. I've never played with this. I think it looks like it's going to try to spike some stuff. Just it has triple Dark Raid. It has some like crazy capital ships. I don't know if this in the long term is an answer to anything. It might just be noise in the data that one of these players, a very accomplished player, was able to maneuver through a lot of this event. We can see here that he beat a Rey, a Han, a Piet, a Jango. Oh, actually, he lost to that Jango. And then he beat a Palp. He lost to a Han. Then he beat a Gar, a Rey, and a Jango. And then drew in the first round into a Jango, beat a Cad, beat a Bosk, beat a Jango. Yeah, so he was able to take some Jangos down. Definitely piloted this well. It's an interesting deck. And yeah, if you want to see this deck in a larger image, do check out SW Competitive Hub. So that's the event breakdown, right? I normally, when I cover these things, I'll look at a lot more deck lists. I'll look at the meta a little more, but this is the meta. It is a Jango. This Jango is the meta. Any deck you play right now has to like 100% be ready to like try to beat Jango. If you are asking me objectively what you should play at any event right now, it is Jango Tarkin Town, no questions asked. It is the best deck by a wide margin. It's not close. You can beat it with things. Yes, it is true that it is beatable by some things, but its power level is so high that even when you build counter decks for it, it can still sometimes win. And it is, I think, the objectively correct choice to be playing at a tournament right now. Now, saying that, not everyone wants to play Jango, and that's perfectly fine. I'm probably one of those people. So there are some other decks, like the Quinlan Tarkintown deck is pretty solid. There's some Cad Bane stuff you can do. There's a Cad Blue deck that did really well at the BIATL event. I'll mention that a little later, but it looks to have a pretty good matchup into Jango. And you can try to maneuver some card choices and play a counter deck for Jango. You do lose points in a lot of other places. And as we can see in this pie chart, you can spend your whole all your energy, all your deck space, your leader choice, whatever it may be, to make an anti-Jango deck. He still only starts the tournament at 26% of the meta. So in the first 6-7 rounds, you'll play it once or twice. And sure, you might beat him twice. But can you beat any of the other decks you're going to be playing against? And that's always the problem with trying to queue up like an anti-tiers, like the best deck, whatever it is. If all you're trying to do is make a counter deck for that, what happens when you pair into the other 75% of decks in the first few rounds, right? Great. If you make it into the top 8 with your anti-Jango deck in this event, you probably would have crushed it because there were 7 other Jangos up there. But those decks did not make it to the top 8 because they probably got defeated by a bunch of other things in the process. All right, so we're going to hop over to the next topic. All right, so next topic, we are going to talk about suspensions now. So don't love to do this usually. I kind of like letting things ride a little bit and, just see what other people feel and play the game and compete. But I do believe, and part of this is because I believed this before this event too. During preview season, I was already having concerns with what the tools that Jango is getting in this set. I kind of thought this was going to happen. This validates that, but it's still just one data point. But in internal testing and in conversations with a lot of other players, I believe that something needs to be done. And my vote right now would be the following. I think that Jango, Fett, Triple Dark Raid, and Han Solo should all get suspended. And you might look at Han Solo on this list right now and be like, huh? We were just talking about Jango for the last 10 minutes and nothing else. But I do have a concern that if Jango gets nerfed or suspended, that we're kind of just right back where we started in the previous set because of Han Solo's dominance and that it'll still just be very oppressive to a ton of leaders, specifically any leaders that cost 6 or more. Han Solo almost always has a very high win rate against all of those decks just because of his resource stealing ability with DJ. It's a big part of it. He also just enables these very powerful turn 1 plays and very powerful flip turn plays, right? The 5-7 turn and the turn 1-3 drop are both pretty oppressive situations that Han presents. Now, Han is obviously not performing at a ban-worthy rate currently because he's kind of nowhere, at least we saw. I do think Han does not have actually that bad of a matchup into Jango, but I think a lot of players disagree with me on that one and have moved off of this deck. But that is my case for Han. I think if Jango's gone, we're just back to where we started. But Jango, I think his ability, unfortunately, is just way too powerful. I don't think just hitting cards in the Jango deck is necessarily enough. It might be, but it might not be. And I'd rather just, if I was, doing what I think would make competitive tournaments better and more varied, I would just nix the leader because that's really the offender here. It's not his tools, it's his ability, especially on his unit side, but also on his leader side that has no restrictions on it. It can exhaust leaders. It can, like a 1 drop can exhaust a 12 drop. It doesn't cost an action to do it, right? It's automatic. His stats are the best for a 5 cost, right? I mean, his son was a 4/7, but he got banned, and 3/7 stat line on 5 is very powerful. There is another one, right? Quinlan's another 3/7. We know how powerful that stat line can be. But his uncapped potential to exhaust full boards wasn't nearly as much of an issue in set 3 when there were no cards that would actually do it. But this set, there are 3 cards that do it: IG, 2000, War Juggernaut, and Devastator. And Jango is incredibly oppressive to any decks trying to attack with units, which is the main function of this game. He's very difficult to remove from the board because he's a 5 flip, 7 health leader. It's just, I think he's just too good as a leader. And then we have triple dark raid here. And you might ask, well, if we're banning Jango or suspending Jango, why hit triple dark raid? Well, I think triple dark raid is too good of a card. If you compare this card to sneak attack, for instance, sneak attack only reduces costs by 1. It also eats a card from your hand and the sneak attack from your hand. So you lose 2 cards in the transaction because the unit dies and you only cheat 1 resource. Triple dark raid, on the other hand, cheats 2 resources and does not actually cost you any cards because the card bounces back to your hand, which is sometimes actually even an upside because you get to replay it. And a lot of the cards you're replaying are things like War Juggernaut and Devastator. And the double cheat on this and the fact that you get to search your deck for a card, making this essentially like a tutor, like something that you can like find in your deck, is just incredible. And I understand that it was probably costed this way because there is a whiff potential. It can miss, right? You can look at 7 cards and there'll be no vehicles in them or just 1 and it's bad. But in reality, at this point, with all the new vehicles and there's not really a miss rate anymore, like hardly one. And this card is incredibly powerful and to me a little scary to just have in the game. And the final nail in the coffin here is the synergy with Devastator. In no world is a 6 cost play that can deal 13 damage to your opponent's base and then return the card that does damage when you play it directly to your opponent's base. Puts it back in your hand so you can do it again. In no world is that balanced. I think triple dark raid into Devastator, the moment most of us saw Devastator, we were worried because of the synergy of this card. I was hoping that maybe this would have gotten pre-suspended because of that synergy. And I think even if Jango is gone, you are going to see triple dark raid in decks, and it will just still create game states that are just not pleasant. Think of all these games where you're like at 12 life or something and you're complete control of the game and your opponent plays 1 card called triple dark raid and kills you with a Devastator. It does not lead to particularly provocative gameplay. So this trio of cards, I think, would be my vote for what should change. But there's other options. The lighter touch here would be, instead of Han, you just hit DJ and hope that that's enough. You let Han live as a slightly more fair deck. It takes away probably the most unfair element of the Han deck, especially the mono yellow Han deck, which can play DJ without using tech just on his flip turn, right? We talked about how good Han is because he can go from 5 to 7 and DJ has that magic 7 cost, and mono yellow Han can do that. The other 2 cards I think I would still go with, but if you want to try to let Han survive as a more balanced deck, maybe we just do DJ. And at a minimum, this would be the minimum version. You let Jango live, and you just hit triple dark raid and DJ. You see, in all of these cases, I would still think that hitting part of Han's deck is necessary, because I think if Jango gets knocked down, we're just back to like the tier 1, tier 0 version of Han, which is incredibly oppressive to a ton of decks. So if the leaders are out of the question and they're staying, then it needs to be probably the best cards in both of those decks, and that would be triple dark raid and DJ, and then C. But like I said, I would just go a little more heavy-handed because if it doesn't work, if the minimum approach doesn't work and you're back to hitting something else, then it can get a bit exhausting having to constantly change your deck and change your leader or get new cards, right? Like, I'd rather it all be done at once. So I'd like the more heavy-handed approach. But this has just been one event, and I understand it, and some of you may think this is way too quick to make changes. The reason I think it's okay is because I kind of thought these changes needed to be made before this event too. During spoiler season, at the end of the last season, I already thought Han or DJ should have gotten suspended, and then while the preview season was rolling, we saw IG and War Dragon and Devastator all get previewed. I was like, we should probably do something about Jango before this season even starts. But it's fine. I understand not doing it before. Like, maybe I could be wrong, right? So there's no... I do not know the future, but now that there is a major data point on top of that supports that, I think it would be better to do this sooner rather than later. And I don't expect, like, we've got 2 more sectors coming next week in Denver and in Liverpool. I don't expect any changes necessarily before then. It's very soon, and we will get 2 more giant data points after those 2 events as well. But if and I don't think the trend needs to be 7 out of 8 Jango. I think if we see 3 out of 8 Jango in the top 8, that's still concerning after what we just saw, right? That's still pretty high, and we'll just have to kind of see what goes on. And yeah, hopefully, for me at least, we get some changes soon. All right, next, some happy stuff. The BIATL tournament. So this was a multi-day event in Atlanta hosted by the Boston Network, and I interviewed the hosts of this event, Courtney from the Blonde Sabine channel a few days ago, and Frank as well. I spoke with him, and they hosted an awesome event at Cards HQ in Georgia, and it was really fun. And the first day was a team event, and this was a 3v3 event. These were my 2 teammates that I went with, Alex and John. I had a stream with both of them on my Patreon right before this event, where we talked about our strategy, we talked about our decks. So it was great to kind of do that right before the event and then go out there and win it. So the way this 3v3 worked, it was 32 teams, and it was kind of a bracket, like a March Madness style bracket. It was a double elimination tournament. So if you lost once, you got knocked into a new bracket. And then if you won through that whole bracket, you got to play the winners of the winners bracket, which we did. We did lose once, so we had to claw our way into the winners bracket, where we played against the McClunky team. We beat them we beat them there, but because they had no losses, they had one to give. So we had to play them again the next day for the true finals, and we did get them again and take down the 3v3 tournament. And this was some of the most fun I've ever had playing. Now, I wouldn't recommend looking at this, the decks here, as some kind of like meta setter, because the rule here was that no player on the team could play the same leader. So we did not have 3 Jangos. We had 1, and 30 of the 32 teams had a Jango. So kudos to 2 teams that didn't bring it. But yeah, so we'll take a look at the 3 lists real quick. So I played a Cad Bane Tarkentown, and my goal in this event was to kind of protect my 2 teammates who were playing Mono Yellow Han and Jango. We believe those are the 2 best decks in the game right now, so we wanted to give them as many good matchups as possible. And I felt like this Cad Bane deck, first of all, had a fair matchup within Jango, which was very important. We knew every team was going to have Jango, so often we were trying to just get me in front of the Jango so that the other 2 players could pick whatever matchup. So out of the 10 rounds we played, I played Jango 5 times. So strategy did work pretty well. And I went 3-2 against Jango, including winning in the final match against the Jango. If you want to know a little bit about why I think this deck can beat Jango, it's a lot to do with the capture cards like Relentless Pursuit and Cad Bane. They're very good in that matchup. But yeah, so the Cad Bane was really fun. I really enjoy playing this deck. I did a video on this deck, and the main deck's almost, I believe, identical to what was in that video. It might be identical. I didn't make a lot of changes in the sideboard, and a lot of that had to do with the structure of the team event. But yeah, this was the deck. Here's the Jango deck that John played. This is not a weenie version the way that we saw a lot of the top players in Milan. This had Crafties, Prides, Kylo's Ties, and Starhoppers as like the 2 drops, but there was an indirect damage theme here as well, with Gorilla Soldier being a very powerful 2 drop, although not a great 3 drop, but not a great 3 drop actually into a Mono Yellow Han deck that has a lot of units to absorb that damage. But Radiant 7 here as well as another powerful triple Dark Raid target. You know, there are some variations, and if you want to see some of the other lists from the BIATL 6K event, you'll see some other versions of Jango as well. Some are playing things like the 5-3 Sentinel 4 drop. There were a few that were playing 30 health base Jango to try to get maybe a little bit of an edge in the mirror, and then modify the deck accordingly. Without Tarkin Town, I think you lose even more points into Han. I actually think you might become unfavored into Han if you don't play Tarkin Town. But there are some other matchups that you might gain points on the 30 health. And then Alex's Han deck here. This looks very similar to the set 3 Han. In the main deck, there is only one card from set 4. It is Ahsoka. It feeds into like a more heavy discard version. So Alex used to not play Sparks in the main deck, but when you're bringing in Ahsoka to this main deck, you now can actually have lines of like Spark Bodhi Ahsoka turn 1, 2, 3 to just like demolish someone's hand. There were 3 Commandeers in the sideboard, so that is another set 4 card. But other than that, it is very similar to just like the Value Town Han deck of old. And over here, you can see the bracket for the BIATL 6K, and we will cover me for a moment just so you can take a look at that bottom left. So there was a Von Reg against a Jango down there, which is really cool to see a Von Reg make it. It did lose to the Jango. We see Han Green versus a Cad Colossus. I want to talk about this Cad Colossus in a moment, but that's George Hudson. He took that down, and then he beat the Jango and then went into the finals. In the top left bracket, we had a Jango Mirror that Ian Klein won, and another Cad Colossus that beat a Quinlan ECL. And that Quinlan ECL is Eric, who has won, I think, a couple PQs with the Quinlan Green in the last set, so still rocking it. And then in the in that bracket, Ian Klein was able to beat one Cad Colossus, but then he got paired into George Hudson's Cad Colossus and could not take that one down. And that's how we got the Cad up there in the finals. Then we see more a Jango beat a Sabine. We see a Jango beat a Quinlan. We see a Cad beat a Sabine ECL and a Han Yellow. Philip beat Tyler, who was on Jango, and then Phil beat a Cad Green, and then Phil beat a Jango 30. So Phil here with the Han Yellow, getting through a couple Jangos, and honestly, I've seen him beat so many Jangos. I think he went like 5-1 or 6-1 between all these events against Jango. He really knows how to play that matchup, and he has convinced me, I think, that it's actually just not that bad for Han if you know what you're doing, if you have enough practice, and if your deck is built appropriately for that matchup. And he got kind of a dream final situation, which was the Cad Colossus. The Cad Colossus is not built to beat Han, in my opinion. I spoke to George a bit about this. George makes some really crazy decks. This Cad Colossus is a really interesting take, and I agree with a lot of what he was saying. And also, from experience, I've never played Cad Colossus, but I've played Cad Tarkentown and Cad Green, and I don't think those decks are nearly as good into Jango as this blue version is, but I understand where Cad has some edges into Jangos at times, especially with the capture cards, like I mentioned, Relentless Pursuit and Cad Bane. And when you're giving this deck even more health and blue interaction, I can very well see how it's well positioned into Jango. Unfortunately, of the 3 Cads, it's probably the worst positioned into Han. Han being not so popular right now, that may be okay. But here he got into the finals, ended up playing the only Han the only Han Yellow in this top 32, and he did lose to the Han, and Philip won it, which is congrats to Phil from McClunky. Awesome to watch him kind of just mow through this top 32. But this event was awesome. This top 16 was made up of top 8s from 2 different, like 120 person pools. So once those 2 tournaments ended, each 8 got put into this event, and then they played this bracket out. If you want to see some of the deck list, like I said, go to the SLU competitive hub and you can check out all the deck lists here. You'll be able to, you'll have to go into the 2 different pools to see the top 8 from each, but they're all there, and you can take a look. So in this one, there were 6 Jangos, by the way, out of the top 16, which, you know, it's not Milan levels, but 6 out of 16, that's also very high. It's almost 40%. All right. So in conclusion, Jango is the best deck, and it's everywhere. Play it Jango, or be incredibly ready to beat a lot of Jangos if you want to advance, but also do caution you. Remember, especially in like a day 1 of a sector or something, even in a 9-round tournament, if Jango's only starts at 25% of the field or 30% of the field, you'll play it twice, 3 times maybe. You still have to beat a lot of other decks. So you can't sell out completely unless all of a sudden 400 out of 500 people show up with this deck. At which point, we got way different problems. But if you're gonna play Jango too, you have to be ready for the mirror. So you have to try to figure out what is the right mirror configuration. Is it the 1-drop spam versions? Is it the heavier like 2 drops? Is it playing 30 health Jango? Whatever it may be, some of that might help get an edge. While there's no suspensions, this is the format we live in, and this is what we have to prepare for, which I will continue to do. I'm also going to start at least brainstorming thoughts for what decks might be good in the future if there is no more Jango or no more Han or no more TDR and no more DJ or whatever other solutions might come, right? There's 3 options here. Nothing changes, and we have to adapt to this or just figure out the best Jango deck. There's like a really heavy-handed suspension where these leaders get axed, and then there's like the light version where maybe just a card from these decks get axed. And I am going to at least start to think about what that may look like, and just have some ideas, right? Because I don't want to get caught off guard and have no plan for what may happen. So yeah, that's what I got for you. You know, let me know what you think. I know some of this might be controversial. I know suspension talks is never like really the feel good thing you always want to hear about, but I'm curious what do you think? If you think something needs to be suspended, if you think we need to be in more of a wait and see approach, if you think other things might be sufficient to suspend and not what my proposals were, all that, leave a comment, let me know, and until next time, take care.